There is a name that once made kings tremble, a name that stretched from the shores of Greece to the rivers of India, a name carved into the walls of every city they ever conquered and whispered with terror in every city they couldn't. The Persian Empire. At its height, it ruled over 40 million people, nearly half the world's entire population. It built roads that crossed 3 continents. It commanded armies so large, ancient historians said they drank rivers dry. But what history rarely tells you is how they built it all, and what truly destroyed it. This is the complete story of the Persian Empire. From the day one shepherd king changed everything, to the night a single torch ended it all. Before the Persian Empire, the ancient world had its masters. Babylon ruled Mesopotamia with an iron fist. Egypt sat behind its deserts like a god behind walls. Assyria had terrorized the known world for centuries, skinning kings alive and stacking their skulls outside conquered cities. And Persia? Persia was a small, broken collection of tribes living under the boot of someone else. The Medes controlled them completely. The Persians were vassals, barely a footnote in history. That was about to change, because somewhere in the hills of Anshan, a boy was growing up. A boy who would not just free his people from the Medes, he would free nearly everyone else too. His name was Cyrus. (559 BC). Cyrus becomes king of the small Persian tribe of the Achaemenids. His kingdom is modest, his army even smaller. But Cyrus had something no other ruler in the ancient world possessed. He understood people. Most conquerors of that era ruled through fear. Destroy a city, burn its temples, scatter its people, break their spirits so completely they never rise again. Cyrus had a different idea entirely. What if you conquered people and then let them keep everything they loved? First, he turned on his own Median overlords. In 550 BC, he rose against King Astyages of the Medes, the man his people had served for generations. The battle should not have been close, but Cyrus had spent years building loyalty inside the Median army itself. Promises made in secret, deals struck by firelight. When the two armies finally met on the field, half the Median soldiers put down their weapons and walked to Cyrus's side. Astyages was captured without a single major battle, and Cyrus let him live, even gave him a position at court. The ancient world had never seen anything like it. But Cyrus was just getting started. To the west, the kingdom of Lydia watched nervously. King Croesus of Lydia was one of the richest men alive. His name is where we get the phrase, rich as Croesus. He decided to strike Cyrus first, before this upstart Persian king grew too powerful. Big mistake.
Control your mounts! They won't advance!
Cyrus deployed camels against the Lydian cavalry. The horses panicked at the smell. The cavalry collapsed. Sardis, Lydia's legendary capital, fell within weeks. Again, Cyrus spared his enemy. He let Croesus live. He let the people keep their customs, their religion, their dignity. Word spread across the ancient world like wildfire. And then came Babylon. Babylon was the greatest city on earth. Its walls were so thick you could hold a chariot race on top of them. It had never been taken by force. In 539 BC, Cyrus didn't take it by force. His engineers diverted the Euphrates River, which flowed directly through Babylon's walls. The water level dropped, and under the cover of darkness, while the Babylonians celebrated a festival inside, Persian soldiers walked under the walls through the riverbed. The city fell without a battle. What Cyrus did next made him a legend for all time. He freed every slave in Babylon, every prisoner, every exiled people, including the Jews who had been held captive there for decades. He issued the world's first known human rights charter, the Cyrus Cylinder, carved in cuneiform, declaring that no person would be enslaved or oppressed in his empire. The Jewish people called him the Anointed One, a Messiah, a liberator. The Babylonians called him their king. In 20 years, Cyrus had gone from a minor tribal king to the ruler of the largest empire the world had ever seen. He died in 530 BC, fighting a small border war in the east. Buried in a simple tomb in Pasargadae, a tomb that Alexander the Great would visit 200 years later and weep. The empire he built was just beginning. Cyrus's son, Cambyses II, inherited the greatest empire on earth, and immediately decided it wasn't enough. In 525 BC, Cambyses turned his eye toward the one prize his father never claimed: Egypt, the land of the pharaohs, the oldest civilization on earth, the kingdom that believed its rulers were gods. At the Battle of Pelusium, Cambyses crushed the Egyptian army. The pharaoh fled. Egypt, ancient, eternal, untouchable Egypt, surrendered to a Persian king in a single afternoon. But where Cyrus was disciplined, Cambyses was erratic. He tried to send an army through the Sahara Desert to conquer an oracle. 50,000 men walked into the desert. Not one came back. He allegedly mocked Egyptian religion, killing the sacred Apis bull, desecrating temples. Whether it was true or propaganda, the damage was done. His own people began to fear him. In 522 BC, a man claiming to be his own dead brother seized the throne back in Persia. Cambyses rushed home to deal with it. He never made it. He died on the road, possibly from a wound, possibly from poison. History isn't sure. The empire had no clear heir. For one dangerous year, it teetered on the edge of collapse. And then a young nobleman, a distant cousin of Cyrus, made his move. His name was Darius. Darius was not the obvious heir. He was young, he was a distant relation, there were other men with better claims. But Darius had something the others didn't: absolute clarity about what needed to be done. He organized a coup, killed the pretender to the throne, and declared himself king in 522 BC. Then he spent the next 2 years crushing 19 separate rebellions across the empire, personally leading armies in multiple directions simultaneously. By 520 BC, the empire was unified, and Darius got to work. Because Cyrus had conquered an empire, but he hadn't built one. Darius built the Royal Road, a 2,700-kilometer highway stretching from Sardis to Susa, with rest stations every 25 kilometers. A message could travel the entire length in just 7 days. On foot, the same journey took 3 months. For the first time in history, an empire could communicate faster than its enemies could react. He standardized the currency across 40 different nations, one weight of silver accepted everywhere. Trade exploded. He divided the empire into 20 provinces called satrapies, each governed by a local official, each paying a set amount of tribute, each left to govern in their own cultural way. And then he built Persepolis. Persepolis was not just a city, it was a declaration. It said, "Every nation we have conquered sends tribute here. Every king in the world answers to us. Every road leads to this place." The walls showed delegations from every corner of the empire, Egyptians, Indians, Lydians, Ethiopians, all bearing gifts to the Persian king. It was the most magnificent building on earth. And Darius would spend the rest of his reign making sure everyone knew it. But far to the west, a problem was brewing. A cluster of Greek cities under Persian control, the Ionian Greeks, had grown restless. In 490 BC, they revolted, and they asked their cousins on the Greek mainland for help. Most Greek city-states refused, too dangerous. Athens sent 20 ships. It was enough to help the Ionians burn Sardis, the Persian provincial capital. When Darius heard the news, he reportedly asked his servants, "Who are the Athenians?" After that day, he kept a servant whose only job was to whisper 3 words in his ear before every meal. In 490 BC, Darius sent his general Datis with 25,000 soldiers and 600 ships to punish Athens. 25,000 against 10,000. The Athenians were outnumbered almost 3 to 1. Every Greek city that Persia had approached before this had either surrendered or been destroyed. Athens chose a third option. At the Battle of Marathon, the Athenian general Miltiades made a decision that defied all military logic. He ordered his men to run at the Persian line. At a full sprint, under arrows, into the heart of the Persian army. The Persians had never seen anything like it. They were archers, cavalry, spear throwers, fighters built for distance. They weren't built for this. 6,000 Persians died on that beach. Athens lost fewer than 200 men. Darius was furious. He began preparing an even larger invasion immediately. He never launched it. In 486 BC, while preparing his armies, Cyrus the Great died. He had ruled for 36 years. He had built the greatest empire in human history. He had transformed a collection of conquered peoples into a functioning civilization. But he had not avenged Marathon. Xerxes did not think small. He ordered a bridge of boats built across the Hellespont, connecting Asia to Europe. It took engineers 3 years to design. A storm destroyed it before it was finished. Xerxes, in his rage, had the sea whipped 300 times for defying him. He then had the engineers who built it executed, and ordered new engineers to try again. The second bridge held. Ancient sources claimed Xerxes had 2 million soldiers. Modern historians estimate somewhere between 150,000 and 300,000. Still, the largest army ever assembled in human history at that point. Watching them cross, Xerxes began to cry. His uncle asked him why. Xerxes said, "I was struck by pity when I considered the shortness of human life, that of all these thousands, not one will be alive in 100 years. You know what happened at Thermopylae. 300 Spartans and a few thousand allies held a narrow pass for 3 days against the greatest army the world had ever assembled. They all died, but they bought enough time. Enough time for the Greek fleet to fight the Persians at Salamis. At the Battle of Salamis, the Athenian admiral Themistocles lured the Persian fleet into a narrow channel where their numbers became a weakness instead of a strength. Xerxes watched the battle from a golden throne on a hillside above the water. He watched his fleet destroyed. He turned around and walked back to Persia. His great general, Mardonius, stayed behind with 100,000 men to finish the conquest. But Mardonius was defeated and killed at the Battle of Plataea in 479 BC. Persia never invaded Greece again. The empire still stood, still stretched across 40 nations, still collected tribute from half the world. But something had changed. Greece had looked the greatest empire on earth in the eye, and Greece had not blinked. Great empires rarely fall because of a single battle. They fall because of what happens in the corridors of power. After Xerxes, 12 kings ruled the Persian Empire in the next 130 years. Several were murdered by their own families. One was killed by his brother. One was killed by his own son. One was poisoned by his physician.
The Persian royal court became a nest of intrigue, of poisoned cups and midnight assassinations, of mothers murdering daughters-in-law, of brothers eliminating brothers. While this happened inside the palace, outside, the empire was slowly fraying. Egypt revolted and won its independence for 60 years. Greek mercenaries, hired by Persia, realized they were often better soldiers than the armies they served. Local governors, the satraps, began acting like kings, building private armies, fighting each other. The empire didn't collapse from outside. It was hollowed out from within. And far to the northwest, in the small mountain kingdom of Macedon, a young king was watching all of this very carefully. He had read everything ever written about Persia. He studied their battles. He understood their weaknesses. He was 20 years old, and he had already decided what he was going to do. His name was Alexander. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed into Persian territory with just 40,000 soldiers. The Persian Empire had, at this point, over 1 million people under arms across 40 nations. It should not have been a contest. At the Battle of Granicus, Alexander personally led the charge, his horse barely across the river before he was in the thick of the fighting. A Persian officer nearly split his skull with an axe. He killed his way out of it. The Persian king, Darius III, met Alexander twice on the battlefield. At Issus in 333 BC, with 100,000 Persians against 35,000 Macedonians, Alexander broke through the Persian center and rode directly toward Darius's chariot. Darius fled. He left his mother, his wife, and his daughters behind in his tent. Alexander treated them as royalty, gave them every comfort, sent them gifts. It was the most devastating insult possible. Kindness from a conqueror. At Gaugamela, in 331 BC, the final decisive battle, Darius III fled again. He was later murdered by his own men. Alexander wept when they brought him the body. And then Alexander stood at the gates of Persepolis, the city of kings, the throne room of Cyrus and Darius and Xerxes. He walked through the gate of all nations, past the carved tribute bearers on the walls. That night, there was a great celebration. Some say it was an accident. Some say it was deliberate revenge for the burning of Athens 150 years before. Persepolis burned. The royal road, silent. The tribute halls, ash. The empire of Cyrus the Great, conqueror of Babylon. The empire of Darius, builder of worlds. The empire of Xerxes, who made the sea weep. Gone. In 220 years, it had risen from a small Persian tribe in the hills. In one night, it ended. But here is what they never build walls around: the ideas. Cyrus's belief that people deserve to live with dignity under conquest, that idea became the foundation of human rights. Darius's royal road became the model for every empire that followed: Roman roads, the Silk Road, the postal system. Persian art, poetry, architecture, absorbed into every culture that conquered them, from Alexander's Greece to the Arab caliphates to the Mongol Empire. You don't have to survive to matter. You just have to build something worth remembering. The Persian Empire is gone, but the echo has never stopped. If this brought history back to life for you, subscribe. Every week, we reconstruct a lost world that history forgot to show you. The next one might be the most haunting yet.